Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight for our first, well, it's not our first public workshop. This is actually the second of our public workshops around the development of the EV infrastructure plan for Delaware. But this is the same exact content that was provided on October 24th. We did have some folks experience some technical issues in getting into the Zoom room. And so we wanted to make sure we provided everyone with an opportunity to not only learn and hear about what we're doing related to the EV infrastructure plan, but also to contribute and ask any questions. So next slide. So my name is Stephanie Johnson. I'm the Assistant Director at DelDOT with the Division of Transportation Resiliency and Sustainability. Jim Pappas, our director, wasn't able to be with us this evening, but he is part of this team that you can see here. And DNREC has been working in this space for a lot longer than DelDOT has. And so they are a big part of our team. And so I'll turn it over to Susan and Bree for their introductions. Bree, you might have to take it.
Yeah, I just going to say, I think Susan's trying to get herself situated.
Okay, I was trying to do my background, but hello, everybody. Welcome to Monday. My name is Susan Love. I'm the administrator of the Climate and Sustainability Program at the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. But more importantly, I have with me Brianne Pryson, who is our Clean Transportation Program Manager. Say hello, Brianne.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight.
And I'll hand it to our AECOM team.
Hi, I'm Joe Hofstee. I'm with AECOM. I'm the project manager for AECOM. We're helping DelDOT and DNREC develop their plan. I'm joined here with Brendan Connolly, who's out of our energy group, who's doing the analysis and the background and the modeling for us.
Great, next slide. Okay, so today, just so you have a sense of what this next hour will be like, we are going to talk about what to expect from this workshop. We're going to go into some background as to why having an EV infrastructure plan is important and what is exactly an EV infrastructure plan. We'll discuss the draft vision and goals for the plan, what the existing infrastructure currently looks like, and then we'll also get into the analysis, like how we are trying to determine where we're going to put these EV chargers. Then we'll wrap that up with next steps, what happens after the public workshops and how you can stay involved. And then there will be the opportunity through the Q&A of this Zoom session to ask questions, and we hope to be able to provide you with some answers. So with that, I will turn it over to Joe.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I want to spend a little time going over the meeting expectations for tonight. So this is our first public meeting. We did have the one previously on October 24th. And as Stephanie mentioned, this is a repeat of that content. But there is going to be more public meetings with different content that we'll be following that will come after this workshop. So why are we here tonight? We're here to kick off the planning process with you, the members of the public, begin our public engagement, and also start the conversations with you, the public. So during tonight's meeting, we're looking for comments and questions. So if you have any comments or questions, you can use the Zoom's Q&A function at any time during the presentation and during the question and answers period to offer comments or ask questions to the panel. The questions will only be seen by the panel members ourselves. Also, anytime after this meeting, you can go in and fill out a comment form in the project virtual room that can be accessed via the plan's website, which is deldot.gov programs/NEVI. Or also you can send an email directly to the group using the email address evplan@delaware.gov. Also like to pay special thanks to our EV Infrastructure Planning Advisory Group that we've been working with to develop this plan and having meetings with, and will continue to meet with and get feedback from these members listed on the screen here. I'm now going to be turning it over to Ray to go over the back.
Thanks, Joe. So we'll go ahead and get this started with why exactly are we doing this plan, why it's important, and kind of just go over some basics on electric vehicles. So next slide, please. So Delaware's Climate Action Plan was released in November of 2021, and it is intended to guide the state's efforts in minimizing greenhouse gas emissions and maximizing the resiliency to climate change impacts. And so the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions is from the transportation sector, particularly with light duty passenger vehicles. So over the last several decades, we have learned to rely on our cars to get us from point A to point B. And emissions coming from those tailpipes of the cars and the trucks that we're using contain a whole suite of pollutants that are not only the largest contributors to the effect of climate change, but it also has had a profound effect on a negative effect on our air quality and our human health, particularly disproportionately impacted communities near pollution sources such as highways, ports, and power plants. So areas with more traffic are going to see greater effects with higher numbers of affected people. There tend to be higher hospitalization rates in our younger and older populations, and children miss more school from illnesses such as asthma. And so because of this, they tend to fall behind academically. And so there's been a correlation with lower graduation rates in these areas as well. So in the state's climate action plan, one strategy to minimize greenhouse gas emissions is to transition to zero emission vehicles and more efficient transportation systems. So in order to transition into zero emission vehicles, such as electric vehicles, because that is what our technology is today, there needs to be some infrastructure in place to help with that transition. Next slide, please. The availability of charging stations is a critical factor in electric vehicle adoption. And so having a comprehensive charging network, including home and public charging, fast charging, level 2, and that ensures that electric vehicles are as convenient and as conventional vehicles, and that it increases drivers' confidence. So to help guide that transition, we needed to really get an understanding of the landscape and where EV charging should go and what areas have the greatest need and what areas to really focus on, you know. So this EV charging plan will inform us on how to expand that network, how to strengthen the consumer adoptions of EVs, but it also help us ensure grid stability and stimulate the economy with job creation and workforce development and training as well. This plan is intended to be a living document, and it will be updated as that landscape changes, which is pretty often right now. The next slide, please. So another strategy in the climate action plan is to have 17,000 new EVs sold by each year by 2030. And this was the number that had come out of the modeling done for the climate action plan to achieve our emission reduction goals. And so one of the ways to achieve that is by adopting the Advanced Clean Cars 2 vehicle emission standards, which will require 100% of new vehicle sales to be zero emission vehicles by 2035. And so several manufacturers have already declared that they will be all electric over the next 15 to 20 years, with more manufacturers making that declaration as we get further into transition. Next slide, please. So I don't want to assume everyone on the call knows the different technologies, so I just want to kind of quickly go over the basics. So a full battery electric vehicle is simply that. It's just all electric. There's no gas, there's no engine, there's no thousands of moving parts that can break. So they have pretty low maintenance costs. And then we've got our hybrids. So you've got the plug-in version and you've got the conventional or the regular hybrid. So both run on gas with a high amount of fuel efficiency, but the plug-in versions have larger batteries. They do plug into a wall like a fully electric vehicle, and the vehicle can run solely on electric first before it does need to go over to its gas version, the gas engine part. So With the conventional or the regular hybrids, the vehicle kind of chooses when that small electric motor is used, which is generally when it's idling or driving at very low speed. So if you're sitting at traffic lights, a lot of times you'll hear people's engines kind of kick on. That usually is what it's sitting on electric, that little tiny electric motor before it needs to get that extra gas to get going. There's going to be a link put into the chat for you guys. It's a pretty comprehensive list of all of the plug-in hybrid and battery electric vehicles available on the market today. This list will give prices. It's going to give current federal tax credits, which is going to change pretty rapidly over the next couple of years. The safety, the charging rates at different levels, and anything else that you really didn't think you needed to know, it is there for you on that list. So I'll have that dropped in the chat for you. Next slide, please. In terms of how to charge EVs, there are 3 levels. You've got level 1, 2, and DC fast charging, or level 3, though it's not really often referred to as that. Level 1 is your typical 110 volt household outlet. It's a good option for smaller batteries like plug-in hybrids, but for full battery electric vehicles with larger batteries, it's not really that practical because it could take a couple days to fully charge to charge a fully depleted battery. So level 2 chargers are either on a 208 or a 240 volt, depending on its usage, like a typical household appliance. So this is a more practical option for home or at work charging. And so during a work day or overnight charging can provide drivers with a full tank of gas or fuel, if you will, to go about their business. So no more cold winter mornings, having to stand at the gas station, filling our cars up. So for those who do need charging for quick, like for traveling, or they forgot to charge at home or work, DC fast charging stations are a much quicker option to get the charge they need to get to where they're going. Next slide, please. So what's the state's role in electric vehicle charging stations? So we provide funding through various programs, such as grant programs and our rebate program for cars and charging stations. Our role is also to help establish contracting mechanisms and identify areas where policies and regulations may need to be changed or created even in order to accelerate or standardize the infrastructure. So though there are a few state-owned level 2 stations installed at some of the state-owned facilities, the state of Delaware does not plan on owning or operating DC fast charging stations. And the few that are in the state, and though broken, are privately owned and operated. So I'm going to go ahead and punt this back over to Joe, who is going to actually talk about the plan itself.
Thanks, Bree, for that great background information. So as Bree said, I'm going to go into what is an EV infrastructure plan. So what is an EV infrastructure plan? The main goal of the EV infrastructure plan is to identify the future EV Delaware to make sure that the EV infrastructure is in place to support the EV vehicles. Special focus will be paid to the disadvantaged communities, the rural areas, and residents of multi-unit dwellings. The reason special attention will be paid to these 3 groups and areas is that typically it has been seen that these 3 groups and areas have the greatest difficulty and challenges accessing EV chargers. As part of the EV infrastructure plan, we're going to incorporate the following. We're going to assemble data on the existing conditions, what chargers are out there and where they need to go, prepare for future forecasting, and the future forecasting Brendan will be going into, and that is where the EV chargers need to be placed to meet the demands and the needs of the Delaware public. We're going to continue to engage the stakeholders and the public as we are doing tonight. And then we're going to make recommendations for the EV infrastructure priority areas, which Brendan will be discussing about later on in the slides. So some of the main sections that are going to be in the EV infrastructure plan is the plan, vision, and goals, which I'm going to be going over in the next 2 slides. The public involvement and stakeholder engagement. We're also going to have a section going over the existing and future condition analysis, which we're going to be going into greater detail later on in this presentation, which is we're going to look at the Delaware EV market analysis, and we're going to look at the Delaware EV charging demand analysis. The plan is also going to present our findings. And also as part of the plan, we're going to have a section dedicated to deploying the infrastructure / building the future. As part of that section, we're going to look at different policy barriers that may be in place and make recommendations to change those policies. We're going to look at the workforce development needs. So we're going to make sure that people are being trained, people coming out of school or people already in the workforce, that they are trained on this new technology so they can help with the installation of the EV chargers and also be available to maintain these EV chargers as they go throughout their life cycle. We'll also be looking to identify different funding sources to help pay for the EV chargers across the state. And then we're also going to have a section dedicated to resiliency and sustainability. We want to make sure that the EV chargers that are put in place are reliable and out there long-term for people to reuse in the future. So the draft plan vision, which we're looking for public feedback and suggestions. So please, when you're filling out your comment forms, please comment on the draft plan vision. But our draft plan vision is to enable current and future users of electric vehicles to confidently travel in and across Delaware for work, education, recreation, and exploration. The key to this is we want to make sure people have the confidence to rely on the EV charging network that is put in place in Delaware so that they know that they can get from point A to point B and be able to charge their vehicle and go to their next destination. As part of this, we have identified several goals, and I'll go through these goals. The first goal is equity. We want to ensure that the rural, underserved, and disadvantaged communities, including suppliers and contractors, are engaged and realize the plan's benefits. We want to make sure reliability. We want to develop a reliable, convenient, affordable, and equitable EV infrastructure network in Delaware for all users so that people can use it with confidence. We're looking at connections. We want to connect Delawareans and travelers in Delaware to EV chargers to support an electric transportation future. Another key goal is education. We want to develop outreach material on electric vehicles, good charging habits, station locations, station usage, equipment capabilities, and how to provide feedback on the network using social medias and apps. We want to make sure that the public is educated and knows how to use the system and has a good understanding of EV vehicles and the chargers and what to expect. And then evaluation. We want to develop a framework to collect data and evaluate the plan over time and refine and update as needed. As Bree said, this is going to be a living document that we want to continue to update as times change. I'm now going to be handing it over to Brendan to go over existing conditions.
Thanks, Joe. So like you mentioned, we'll be diving into the existing conditions now. Go to the next slide. So based on data pulled from the Alternative Fuel Data Center, we pulled this earlier this year, there are 25 installed DC fast charging locations throughout the state that hosts a total of 97 ports. A port is a connector that can plug directly into a charger. So you'll notice that there's numerous ports for even a single location. So those are the DC fast chargers. In terms of level 2 charging, there's 108 locations for a total of 209 ports. And you can see where those locations are shown in the map on the left. We're going to be providing a close-up of each of the counties on the following slides, but you'll notice some kind of major trends initially that charging is currently installed along some of the major highway corridors in the state and in the northern part of the state. But you'll also see that there's some gaps in the network that we're really trying to fulfill on part of this initiative on the western and eastern side of the state. So for each of the county maps, we're going to be providing a little bit more detail on each charger. We'll know which chargers are Tesla stations and capacity levels at DC fast charging sites. We'll dive into a little bit more detail on why this is important, but it goes back to the federal specifications that are needed for federal funds. Looking at Newcastle County, you'll see that there's a concentration of chargers primarily along I-95 in Newark and Wilmington, with some infrastructure lacking in the southern part of the county. Next slide, please. Kent County, a lot of chargers predominantly along US 13 and Delaware 1, close to Dover. And then finally, Sussex County continues the trend of chargers really being along those those main highway corridors, but also being sited along some of the beach towns on the south, on the east side of the county. Next slide, please. So going back to some of the details on DC fast chargers. So the federal government has designations on specific routes that are being prioritized to install EV charging infrastructure on. And these are known as alternative fuel corridors, or AFCs. You can see that there's 5 routes in the state of Delaware that have been designated as IFCs. Those are I-95, I-295, Delaware 1, US 13, and US 113. There's a substantial amount of funding available to install DC fast chargers along these routes through the NEVI program, which is currently in progress, and Delaware actually received approval for that plan earlier this year. This project really aims to provide charging outside of those corridors and create a cohesive network throughout the state. Next slide, please. Now we'll move on to some of our modeling and analysis conducted to assess where charging demand is and identifying priority areas to site future charging infrastructure. I note that these are preliminary results at this time, and we're really looking for feedback prior to presenting our final results during the next workshop. So to assess charging demand throughout the future, we developed 4 different growth scenarios for EV adoption in the state. And those scenarios investigate the impact of different landscapes for EV adoption. So the impact of cost, model availability, the charging infrastructure, and policies to really support EV adoption throughout 2040. Based on the results, you can see that it's projected up to 32% of passenger vehicle population could be zero emission by 2035, and that's going to require a significant improvement in the available public charging infrastructure to meet that adoption level. The other item I would note is that, to achieve some of those ambitious targets like the Clean Car Initiative in 2035, it's much more charging infrastructure compared to the business as usual cases shown in that chart. So the methodology to identifying some of those locations for future chargers to support adoption, we're going to dive into the methodology here. First, we'll be using data layer analysis to provide more details, and we're going to be providing more details on that in the following slide. But with that assessment, we'll be providing recommendations on the charger type and quantity at each of those areas. And then finally, we want to review this with the public to present our findings, which is what we're doing here today. So diving in a little bit more onto the methodology behind priority area siting. On the next slide, we look at 4 different modules for the assessment. And each of these modules has criteria associated with it that we pull from publicly available sources. Each module and criteria can be weighted based on priorities of the state and local stakeholders. And these are activities that we've done through some of our stakeholder engagement activities. So going through the modules now, the first one being EV charging network. And what we look at for that is the existing level 2 and DC fast charging infrastructure, which we presented on the previous slides. We also look at traffic amounts through AADTs, or average annual daily traffic, pulled from the state databases. The second module is early EV adopters. So for this module, we look at criteria that has been correlated to early EV adoption. This is income, car ownership, education levels, and a couple other factors. Next module is land use. For here, we look at multifamily housing density and population density. And then the final module is equity, where we look into unemployment, social vulnerability, pollution exposure, and the inaccessibility to public transportation. And the final item I would note here is that each of these modules, we perform the weighting and kind of analysis, and they all come together into sort of a final result of where chargers should be sited at a general geographical area. So we'll dive into each of the module results here. Right, so this is the results for the early EV adoption module. On the right, you'll see how we rated, or how we weighted each module and the associated criteria. The check mark or the shaded box is really indicative of what was selected. In the map in the center, you can see that darker areas reflect higher priority areas to site charging. So for this module, early EV adoption, we really wanted to consider areas where charging infrastructure is needed and would be immediately utilized through early EV adoption, right? So based on our findings, adoption is really expected in the northern tip of the state, near Dover and along the southern beach towns. And that's unsurprising, as this is currently where existing charging infrastructure is cited and historical EV adoption has occurred. We'll dive now into the next module. So for the EV charging network, there was a high priority set on filling gaps in the network, as this is a core program goal. And we wanted to identify areas where they would be utilized, and there's a lot of traffic along these major routes. So you'll see in terms of the scoring here, again, darker colors represent a higher priority area. We're really trying to fill in some of those rural areas where there's not existing charging infrastructure, and the main corridor routes where there's a lot of traffic going on are ranked higher than some of the more rural areas. Next slide, please. For the land use module, we wanted to cite charging infrastructure in population centers and where multifamily housing exists to one, reach as many potential end users as possible, but two, multifamily housing residents typically face larger barriers to adoption as they rely on a landlord or a building owner to install charging infrastructure in the parking lot. So we wanted to reach them with the public charging infrastructure that could be carried out through this program. Next slide. And then finally, for the equity module, we really set a high priority here to cite charging infrastructure in underserved areas. Underserved communities often lack charging infrastructure, as is typical with other infrastructure investments for EVs, but they face the disproportionate benefits of pollution. So darker green areas here reflect areas that are more disadvantaged and thus rank higher for areas that we would cite charging infrastructure in the future. Slide. So those are the 4 different modules. We presented the results of each of those. Again, we really want to combine the results of those into a final map, which will indicate at a zip code level where is charging needed. We're not really going into the site-specific location analysis at this level. It's more first to just identify where does charging need to go. So we're really looking for feedback here on the type of criteria that we're including and our process to evaluating where charging infrastructure needs to go. And we'll be sharing the preliminary results during our next workshop meeting. And I'll pass it back to Stephanie now for some next steps.
Thanks, Brendan. So next steps, now you've gotten familiar, hopefully, with our plan, what our vision is and what our goals are. And so our next steps are continue to get feedback from the public, review that feedback and incorporate it in the plan as we continue to work on it. We're going to continue the analysis and mapping for the plan itself. And then we do plan to have another public meeting sometime this winter after the new year. So stay tuned for that. Next slide. So if you're looking to continue to stay involved, we ask that you visit our EV plan website, which can be found at DelDOT.gov/program/NEVI. You can review the displays also in the EV plans virtual room that you can also access on the webpage. And then you'll also find there the comment form where you can provide additional information or feedback that you may have. And you can send an email as well to the EV@delaware.gov. And as I mentioned, just be looking out for the next virtual workshop that we will be hosting. Next slide. And so at this point, we will turn it over to the Zoom question and answers, the Q&A function. I think there's a few questions in there. And I think Susan and a few others have been looking through them. So let's see. Go ahead, Joe.
Yes, Stephanie. So one of the first questions is, where do you see the funding coming from to pay for the EV chargers?
Okay, Susan, you're going to take that one?
Sure. So I think that was actually the last question. There's a series of things, but there's several sources of funding for EV chargers. The high-speed DC fast chargers that Brianne talked about, there is a significant amount of federal funding to help install those chargers. As more and more people actually drive electric vehicles, I believe that we will have to help with financing less and less, as it will become more of a profitable venture for private businesses over time. And so that's the transition we're trying to see there. Over time, right, the first question, and I messed up because I don't know how to use Zoom that well, apparently. The first comment that came in says that Will Trout said that he wanted to share that the level 1 charging, which is basically plugging into a 110 outlet, just like you plug your phone into a 110 outlet, can actually do quite a lot if you are sitting there overnight or over a significant amount of time. And I have certainly had that experience as well. So not everyone will need to do anything to their home or workplace to access charging. And so I think that was a good point that he brought up. Then at home, right now, people who are purchasing electric vehicles who want to have a level 2 charging station are financing that themselves as part of their new vehicle purchase. There are no incentive programs sponsored by the state right now for private electric vehicle chargers, but there are tax credits. The utilities, Bree, you might have to help me here. Delmarva Power has a program, and the Delaware Co-op has a program. If you're in a municipality served by the Delaware Electric Municipal Corporation, I don't think they have any incentive programs right now for charging stations, but there are charging stations of programs available for homeowners through the utilities. And then the state does offer a rebate program for level 2 charging for public use and for fleet use, but not for private homeowners. So there's a variety of funding sources, from private to, and there's some public-private partnerships out there. So talked a lot about that, so I'll move on. I could talk a lot more about the basics of all those programs, but I will definitely move on. There was another question about EV charging demand response. There's a couple questions that really seek to understand how this plan affects electricity generation planning. So planning for our grid, planning for the future of electricity transmission and generation. And the answer to that really is that this is one piece of the puzzle that will be utilized. So we're putting this plan together so that the state, local municipalities, and utility companies can understand the demand that's coming and prepare for it. So this plan itself is not going to address transmission except at a very, very high level. It's not going to dive down deep into, okay, at the corner of Main Street and Lockerman Street, we need to upgrade the transformer there. We're not getting into that level of detail. That's up to the utility company who owns the transmission lines and the local governments, et cetera. So this is one piece of information that we're putting out there, and we're doing it early. right? So we're trying to be in advance of the wave of transformation. So we're being very proactive here so that we have the information that we need to make sure this transition is done early and in a way that is coordinated and transparent to the degree possible. So I hope that helped answer some of the, and there was another question that talked a little bit about off-peak charging, right? People assume that because we are plugging vehicles into the grid, that we will need to double or triple the amount of electricity that we're generating. And that's not necessarily true, because there is adequate electricity on the grid, particularly for the deployment of electric vehicles right now, and especially if those vehicles are being charged off during off-peak hours, in the middle of the night after 9 or 10 p.m. and before 5 or 6 a.m. And so there are programs that usually the utilities run, so Delmarva Power or the co-op or DMEC, to help incentivize people to actually charge their vehicles off-peak. And the vehicles can be set and programmed to do that automatically. And that's really going to be an emerging place where you're going to see the technology go, and the utility companies really looking to incentivize that kind of consumer behavior. But that's removed from this. That would be a utility program, but this plan will show where we might expect to see that deployment first if a utility wants to maybe direct programs to a certain geographic region or something like that.
Another question, will you prioritize DC fast chargers?
So that is it depends on what you mean by prioritization. And so sometimes the projects are prioritized by what kind of funding is available. And you have heard us talk about the NEVI plan, or the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan. And the state will receive almost $18 million to help deploy charging infrastructure. That money also stipulates that DC fast charging has to be done first, and that we have to build out our DC fast charging networks, one location for DC fast charging every 50 miles, which Delaware will be the first to finish, because 1, we're good, but 2, we're small, right? So we don't have to deploy that many EV chargers to meet that goal. Then once we're done with that, that funding source can be used for something else. But there's other funding sources and other priorities. So this plan is helping us really maybe prioritize or figure out the landscape for where we might need to deploy additional things. And I have, since the beginning, been very concerned about multifamily and row home charging, right? So people without garages. It's a much more simple process in general for people who have off-street parking, their own driveways, their own garages. So one of these things we're looking for this plan to tell us is where might be good geographic regions for us to target and focus, not just funding, but policy efforts and education and outreach for areas with more multifamily dwellings. I hope that helped answer that question.
Then there's another question still in the line with electricity. Will charging stations be connected to and receive power from the existing grid, or will they be powered by some other stationary power source?
So in general, the stations will receive power from the existing grid, but that doesn't mean that you can't also have charging stations in certain locations that are powered by distributed resources, solar, battery backup. And there are some folks who are interested in doing some solar canopies and linking those solar canopies over parking lots to charging stations. So this plan isn't going to tell us what type of charging necessarily, other than level 3, level 2, or DC fast charging level 2. And it doesn't go down into the brand or make or style or color, right? It's really about how much, where, and when. And then all those other details are going to be up to the people who are actually going to be building and providing this, whether it be the state, whether it be private entity, whether it be, your local Wegmans or something like that in a parking lot. I don't think the new Wegmans has charging, and they do in other places. So I've driven by a couple times looking. All right, somebody else has to answer some questions. Sorry, my mute was off, so I just kept going.
And there's another question. Are there other groups / projects that this group's aware of that's working towards using utility-based changes, like with electricity demand management, that you could direct people to?
So in Delaware, there is a program with Delmarva Power that has a time of use rate. There, I believe, is a program for a Delaware cooperative where they are, Brianna, is that time of use rate for the co-op?
No, it's an off-peak, on-peak, a peak program.
Okay. Oh, a peak reduction program.
Yeah.
Right.
To charge off-peak, that,
Gotcha.
to incentivize them charging off-peak.
And then there are definitely, there's lots of research and studies and pilot projects around, but nothing I can specifically think of offhand. Maryland has some projects and programs as well, if you'd like to look into that, and they're pretty analogous to our situation as well. And I think a lot of the questions that you all have to do with the intersection of grid, the transformation that we're seeing with renewable energy, electric vehicles, and all of that, and know that this is a piece of that puzzle. There are other efforts going on in the state which we are not as engaged with, so I can't answer questions about that, but for which we're cooperating with and communicating with those efforts as well, to make sure that we're all moving forward and each one of our pieces is helping to make this transition.
And then someone from the public said they believe Wegman says coming soon about the EVCs.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I was feeling a little left out because I know the Wegmans and PA has one.
Okay.
Not that I'm pinpointing Wegmans. I don't mean to be unfair to Wegmans. Every grocery store could have a level 2 EV charger out front. And it is certainly a good shopping centers, main streets, et cetera, are great for EV charging because you'll be there for, an hour, 2 hours. I mean, nobody shops at the grocery store for 3 hours unless there's a long line or you're checking yourself out. But, those are great locations for level 2 chargers. And we certainly have had several businesses take advantage of our rebate programs to put those out for their customers. I don't want to be accused of pinpointing Wegmans or calling them out unfairly.
Okay. I think we've got through all of the questions. And as we may have said earlier, I can't remember, we will be adding, after today's workshop, we will be adding a frequently asked questions portion to the webpage as a result of the questions that are asked tonight and the questions that were asked the other night on October 24th. So we'll be combining all of those questions and providing the answers there. And you should be able to access those again through the webpage and then also through the virtual room. I believe Todd posted the webpage to the link to the virtual room in the chat. And Susan, there was a link you wanted to provide as well, was there not? You're muted.
I did, it didn't come up, but we are working on electric vehicles in a number of different ways. And so one of the ways is through planning for the infrastructure, which is what tonight's meeting is all about. Another way is through some emissions regulations. So the state of Delaware regulates tailpipe emissions and is undergoing a discussion about updating our tailpipe emission regulations, a portion of which would require an increasing number of zero emission vehicles to be delivered for sale in the state of Delaware. So this is all happening pretty fast, and I wanted to make sure that everybody who is here, who is interested in electric vehicles and electric vehicle policy, also has an opportunity to attend those workshops, which are specifically focused on regulatory actions. Tonight's workshop is all about planning and preparing and being proactive. The workshops that are being hosted by our friends at the DNREC Division of Air Quality are about tailpipe emission regulations. But if you like attending Zoom workshops and you're super into electric vehicle infrastructure and electric vehicle deployment, you might want to attend one of those upcoming workshops. There are 3 this week and 2 in December, and they're all the same workshop. So if you're workshopped out for this week, which I think we all will be, you can attend in December and find out what that's all about. But the workshop and vehicle regulation link is, Todd dropped that into the chat if you want to check it out, or you can just read about it if you're interested. So that's another bucket of action that we are undergoing. And Brendan, do you have your hand up? Or is that an accident?
Oh, no. I did on it. I'm sorry.
Not the only one who's having Zoom issues today.
Okay, I think we got through all of the question and answers. Thank you all for participating this evening and for the level of engagement that you've provided. We really appreciate your input. This is a statewide plan, and so having the public contribute to the plan is critical to creating a plan that is inclusive and considerate of what the public needs are. We will do the next presentation at 6 o'clock, so in about 12 minutes. If you'd love to hear the same exact content, you're more than welcome to remain online or come back to us. We're just going to sit here with our cameras off until 6 o'clock, where we will give the same exact presentation. If others jump on, the questions and answers may be a little bit different, but otherwise the content will be the same. And then this recording will also be available on the webpage probably by the end of this week. So thank you for joining us tonight. Have a good evening.